The Auburn Tigers have secured the number one overall seed in the NCAA tournament as per the bracket reveal last night. Obviously, everyone's seen it by now. You're probably filling out your brackets as we speak, and I would imagine a lot of people are probably picking this Auburn team to go fairly far because they have looked dominant all season long. They've kind of had their slip-ups lately, which is what we're going to talk about here. And who better to do it with than one of the biggest Auburn fans I know, Brandie. Got her right here to talk about the recent struggles of the Tigers, obviously going out in the semifinals of the SEC tournament. They've lost 3 of their last 4 heading into the big dance. And I know Jay Williams had a tweet recently that said no team had ever, it was either made a Final Four or won a national championship that's lost 3 of their last 4 heading into the tournament. So, Brandie, what do you think about the state of the Auburn Tigers as we head into this tournament? What's got to be fixed if a run's going to occur? And what do we think about their draw in general? I know we did obviously the big bracket prediction and we picked our games and we talked about Auburn's path a little bit there, but getting into the nitty gritty of it, just what all do we think about Auburn as we head into this postseason?
Yeah, I think Auburn is still in a spot to go on a run in this tournament. Yes, Auburn has lost 3 of their last 4, but all of those losses were within 11 points or less. And the average rating of all 5 of the losses Auburn had this season is 6.2 of those teams in KenPom. So Auburn has lost to some very good teams: Texas A&M, Alabama, Tennessee, and I think those are our last 3 losses. So those are all really good teams and top seed. Like the 2 of those 3 teams that I just mentioned are 2 seeds in the tournament. So I think Auburn's really going to benefit from an initial first round get right game. Auburn has had some struggles in our front court from Chaney Johnson getting in early foul trouble, as well as Dylan Cardwell, and neither of them have kind of been able to get in a rhythm offensively for us. And also, I think there's possibly a little bit of a National Player of the Year campaign on the court going on from Auburn in the last few games as well. So after kind of Amari Williams really locked down Janai and he didn't have the best performance against Texas A&M, I think the coaching staff really wanted to focus on ensuring he remained in that race with Cooper Flagg, and that was evident in his performance against Alabama. I thought it was very evident against his performance against Ole Miss in this SEC tournament that they won that game, and also in the game against Tennessee as well, outside of the free throw shooting, which obviously a tad bit of a concern. So I think Auburn needs to go back to some of the offensive sets they were running towards the middle of the season and at the beginning of the season, creating shots and open looks for our guards. Haven't been doing the best job of that lately and have really been running the offense totally and fully through Janai, which Auburn has had to do 2 out of the last 3 years. We haven't really had to do that as much this year because our guards have been a lot better. But we have to go back to that if we want to make a run in this tournament. And I think that they will, because Bruce Pearl mentioned that in his press conference, how you can't just rely on everything to flow through Janai. So if you watch the end of the Tennessee-Auburn game in the SEC tournament, almost every single offensive set started off with feeding Janai the ball on the right side and having him work inside, which works most of the time, but it eats a lot of the clock out and isn't great whenever you're trying to come back when you're down 11. So is there concerns from like a statistical standpoint of no number 1 overall seed has won the national championship when they've lost 3 out of the last 4? No, but what number 1 overall seed had clinched the SEC or their conference regular season championship with 2 games left to play in conference play without having to have a share of the title, I think is another question I would ask on that statistic. So I guess for me as like a fan, I'm not fully concerned. And also Auburn plays better with a chip on their shoulder and having people doubt them, and having stats like this thrown out there, having talking heads talking about all the 1 seeds except for Auburn, I think it's going to really benefit us in the long term.
Yeah, and that Bruce Pearl, he had me chuckling a little bit at the end of his post-game press conference where somebody asked him, like, is the concern there with this little skid? And he just kind of scoffed at him and was like, we've lost to Texas A&M, Alabama, and Tennessee. Like, are you kidding? And I think that's really just what it comes down to here with this Auburn team. I've kept up with them a decent amount all year long. I was there watching them when they just dominated Kentucky and Rupp Arena, and it feels like since that Kentucky game, they have kind of been trending downwards in just terms of their style of play as compared to what we expect from them. But I also don't think that they've just completely lost their way and forgotten their bread and butter. I just think that maybe, I mean, you may not agree with this, Brandie. I'll let you answer it, but maybe this was just a case of where Auburn was kind of coasting through the end of that regular season after they secured the regular season title. I know they had the game they were fired up for against Alabama, but in that Texas A&M one that came immediately after the Kentucky game, it kind of seemed like it was a team that was a little bit just kind of maybe hung over from the thrill of winning a regular season title that early on.
Yeah, I think in that Texas A&M game too, it was, yes, that a little bit of a hangover, but also we were without our starting point guard in Denver
Yeah, Denver
Jones,
Jones,
and
yeah.
he's our best perimeter defender and on-ball defensive guard that we have, and I would argue one of the best in the country. So that's a huge loss on the defensive side of the ball, and Auburn's defense had been not the best in the Texas A&M and in that Alabama game. And one of the things that hadn't been good and actually was interior defense, which we've talked about before on here. And I think that Auburn did a really great job in the game against Tennessee in the SEC tournament for the second half defensive adjustments that were made. When Tennessee really could have opened that game open and won by a lot, Auburn came back and made it a game and just couldn't get it done there at the end. So I'm not too concerned when it comes to that, as long as our game plan and our scout team is like on point with whoever we end up getting in the round of 32, assuming we don't get upset by a 16 seed.
Gonna go out on a limb and say that's probably not gonna happen, just to be honest with you. And a thing that is very encouraging too, I think, for Auburn's long term, just where they can go in the tournament, their longevity, is the fact that they haven't taken a loss outside of quad one this year. So you don't really expect them to have a letdown spot against, I mean, Louisville or Creighton. Obviously, that's going to be a quad one game, but an 8 or a 9 seed, I don't really worry about them not getting up for that game because they have really played with the best of the best all season long. That it's not really a matter of if they'll be able to just come out with that same energy. So I think they're pretty safe as far as just making it far in the tournament goes. But when you look at the draw itself, Brandie, I mean, obviously they have the first matchup against the winner of the playing game in that 16 seed spot, and then they're looking at Louisville or Creighton in that second round, and then there's a lot of ways it could go from there. You could be seeing a Michigan, a Texas A&M, or maybe one of UC San Diego or Yale goes on a Cinderella run to make that Sweet 16 matchup, and then from that bottom part of the bracket, I feel like it's a pretty safe bet that you're going to be seeing Michigan State in the Elite Eight. But in terms of the draw itself in the NCAA tournament, what do you think about just how Auburn matches up against all of these teams? And is there a team in general that you're concerned could possibly pick them off short of the Final Four?
Yeah, starting off with just the 8 and 9 seeds, I think a lot of our fans have complained because we got Louisville, who's very underseeded at an 8, and our games are being played this weekend in Lexington, right down the road from Louisville. And then on the other side, in the 9 seed, there's Creighton, and Kalkbrenner is one of the best bigs in the country. And obviously, we have the best big in the country. So I think there's maybe a little bit of concern from our fans there with that. But I honestly think we match up well against both of these teams. Louisville has a little bit of a depth issue due to injury right now. And Auburn has an incredible perimeter defense. And if Louisville's not able to get the shots they want off of from the perimeter, I think they're really going to struggle to score against Auburn. So I actually really wouldn't mind seeing Louisville, even though they may have a lot of fans travel to that game, given where it's at regionally. When it comes to Creighton, I think that Kalkbrenner is really great defensively, not as big of an offensive threat as some of the better bigs are in the country, but I think he's really good defensively. And I think that a lot of their offense runs fully through Ashworth. I feel like Auburn should be able to stop Ashworth. And so outside of just the interior matchup there, I really don't mind both, like, either of the teams that we're going to play, whichever one we do. So, but I do think that there is a little bit of pressure to get to the Sweet 16 from that, and that to me matters a little bit more. So Bruce Pearl hasn't been to the second weekend in March since the 2019 Final Four run. He wants this bad, but that also means that there's pressure, and sometimes pressure can cause a team to maybe not perform their best, or a staff to maybe not maybe overlook some things or try to get cute with things. So I would say the pressure of getting to the second weekend is more worrisome to me than the actual matchups themselves. And then for the other teams that are in the bracket, I think it would be really cool and fun to, if we did end up getting to play Michigan, simply because Trey Donaldson is in their guard room there, and he was a transfer from Auburn. Also, their Dobo, director of basketball operations, is a former Auburn player, KT Urel. So I think it'd be really fun if Auburn got to match up against Michigan. I would be curious to see how we handle the two bigs that they run in Golden and Wolf. And Auburn also played Wolf last year because he was on Yale's team that beat Auburn in March Madness. So that one to me, I think could be a really fun matchup for Auburn, just because of all the storylines there. From like an actual basketball perspective, I think Michigan just turns the ball over a little bit too much. And then for some teams I'm worried about, I would say definitely obviously the 2 seed in our region. Michigan State is a top 15 offensive rebounding team, and those are the types of teams that we've been struggling against in conference play. I don't know what it is about defensive rebounding that we haven't been the best at with teams that are good offensive rebounding teams. And that brings me to Texas A&M, which is a top 3 offensive rebounding team in the country, and Buzz Williams is like 6 or 2 against Bruce Pearl, and his style of play, just for whatever reason, is Bruce's kryptonite against the modern flex action offense that he runs. So I'm honestly praying for a Sweet 16 revenge matchup between Yale and Auburn, simply because I don't want to see Buzz Williams' squad. I think Texas A&M would be a bad matchup for Auburn. But maybe there's a little bit of revenge factor from the regular season. Maybe there's a little bit of revenge factor for Bruce, knowing that Buzz has his number. I just don't think that their style of play, though, is conducive to Bruce Pearl as a coach in general, and not this team either. So
Yeah, and with the way Yale's playing this year, I mean, it's not crazy to say that they could make it there. They've got a decent draw, and honestly, I've heard some people say, but this Yale team this year, they honestly may be better than they were last year because they're sitting in that same kind of territory that they were last year, and they're a top 80 team in the net, I believe, and I think they only took 1 or 2 conference losses. John Polakidis, he is absolutely phenomenal, averages about 19 a game, and Bez and Bang, the Ivy League Player of the Year and the Defensive Player of the Year in that conference. So they've got a good core there. If you're looking for a dark horse Cinderella team, I think a lot of people are going to go to UC San Diego, but I think Yale might honestly be a better choice. But keeping it with strictly Auburn, down the stretch here, I think what's going to be important for you all just as a neutral observer, Tahad Pettiford, how he plays in March, I think he's going to be really crucial because we saw in the Tennessee game, he didn't play really the best that you'd like to see out of him. And that's a guy that completely changes the dynamic of the team because he comes in off the bench behind Miles Kelly and Denver Jones, and he's able to just be a spark plug. He's shifty. He gets his own shots. He can get to the rim. Just those are the kind of guys that really can be at the core of a March Madness run, those shot creators that can go out and get their own buckets. And as just like with Janai Broom, obviously, a lot of people are going to say you want to see him keeping things going the way that he is, the National Player of the Year talent we know he's capable of. But I honestly think the guys around him, like your Tahad Pettifords, Denver Jones, keeping it up on the defensive end, it's going to be important as well. Miles Kelly, if he can keep sniping from downtown like he has all year. Those sets that they run over at Auburn where it's usually always centered around somebody setting a screen that frees up Miles Kelly at the top of the key for a 3. It's automatic every time when he gets to that spot. And I just think that there's a lot of guys around Janai that are going to be really crucial. And I hate to call him out too, but Chad Baker-Mazara, we obviously know that there's a lot of controversy when it comes to him at times. He can be a little bit, outlandish on the court, I think it's safe to say. And obviously, Brandie, we know what happened last year when he got thrown out of that first round game pretty early. So we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that. But how important is it going to be for guys like Chad, obviously him just playing to the standard that he's capable of and keeping us cool as well. But then even beyond him, the guys like Tahad, Denver Jones, Miles Kelly, I think that's going to be critical in determining how far this postseason run can go.
Yeah, I agree. We absolutely cannot have any ejections in this year. And I think why Auburn started off this season playing so well against Houston and going into Maui and winning that tournament is because they still had that chip on their shoulder of we lost to Yale last year and our second best player on the team got ejected immediately into the game. And at the beginning of the season, I thought Chad did a really good job of keeping his emotions under control. Obviously, we all know what happened in the Alabama game this year. That's just what teams are doing to game plan against him. We saw it with Jeremiah Fears in the Oklahoma game when they got into it. We saw it with Silas Dimery when he went after Denver Jones in our game and Chad tried to break the fight up between those two and Chad still ended up getting a tech. Like, he's never going to get the benefit of the doubt from the refs and he's always going to be targeted and he has to not retaliate and he has to control his emotions and find a way to grow up and be the bigger person. And that's going to be very crucial to this run because he is a leader on the team and he is one of the guys that's older with more experience and has been in this system now for 2 years. Miles Kelly's older and has experience, but this is his first year in the system. Tahad's obviously a freshman. So really like crucial having Janai, Chad, and Denver all lead this team going into March, being kind of what I would consider the leaders. But I agree a lot with what you said about Tahad. I think Tahad and Denver want to combine 1 for 14 or something like that against Tennessee. And Tahad was 0 for 8 out of that 1 for 14, 1 for 15, whatever it was. So it's a concern that he missed those shots. I think it's a little bit more concerning that Denver wasn't aggressive enough to take more shots. So making sure that Denver is getting those shots down because kind of in our loss to Yale last year, he was a little bit hesitant there too. But Denver Jones and Chad Baker Mazar are our best free throw shooters too. And part of why we lost Tennessee was all the free throw calls were Janai, and Janai he's so up and down when it comes to free throw shooting. So finding a way to make sure our guards drive in the lane too, and maybe bait a little bit of fouls or get some good calls there too is super important. But we saw this happen with Tahad earlier this year where he had a couple of bad games and he bounced back and I thought he was phenomenal in the game against Kentucky. But leading into the Kentucky game, he wasn't playing his best basketball. He had a couple of games where he kind of looked like his shot wasn't falling and it was like, what was going on? So I think that's just, freshman shooting streaks happen. So I feel confident that he'll be ready for March, and he's from New Jersey, and so he has that New Jersey dog in him. If any young freshman is like ready to step up and get over whatever's happening, I feel like it's him. So I think Auburn just needs to get back to like running those sets where they get our guards open because they've kind of gone away from that and have just been running the offense through Janai lately.
So you said that you're hoping for just a second weekend, but if you had to put a set in stone expectation where you think this team finishes, call it right now where you think it's going to head this postseason. Let
me just say, Bruce Pearl said if anything isn't a national championship, it's a disappointment. I'm going to say this team goes to the Final Four. I think this team has everything it's made of to go to the Final Four, and the draw that we got, to me, favors us more than I would have expected it to. And I like our draw. People have complained about our draw. Our fans have complained about our draw. I actually think that we have a good draw, a favorable draw. If we get to the Sweet 16, I feel very good that we have a great shot at making the Final Four. Those games are going to be played in Atlanta. We'll have the home crowd there. We played in that arena before. We beat the crap out of the team we played in that arena too. So I don't know. I'm calling it now. I'm a fan. I'm biased, of course, but this team has all the makings and has shown us that throughout the season. And I think they're really going to benefit from not having to play the gauntlet of a conference schedule and non-conference schedule that we had to play.
Yeah, I'm definitely locking Auburn into the Final Four when I fill out my personal brackets. I just feel like it's kind of just destined with how good of a season they've had and the insane just victories against quad ones all season long, the 16-5 quad one record. This team, they're built for March. They've been battle tested in the SEC. I think that the Final Four is a pretty safe bet for them to get back there for the first time since 2019. So I like what I'm seeing with Auburn, even though they have had the recent struggles. I think that Bruce Pearl is really going to hone in on that as we get into the lead up to these games coming up. And it should be a nice turnaround as we head into the NCAA tournament. But Auburn, #1 overall seed, we're going to see if they live up to it here over the next couple of weeks.